everyone, it's Daz here from Not Another Whiskey Podcast, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Stuart MacPherson. Now, Stuart MacPherson, I had the pleasure of working with him at Edrington for around 4 or 5 years, a wee while ago now, and back then, as the master of wood for the Macallan, Stuart was responsible for the wood quality and sourcing of casks for the Macallan. Did a lot of work, of course, on Highland Park and Glenrothes. Spent a lot of time over in Spain. And prior to that, he was the cooperage manager at the Clyde Cooperage. And prior to that, he was a cooper. And he has a huge amount of experience from 1979 all the way through to his retirement, which was this year. And not only is he a great guy, he's a fabulous mentor, and he's taught me an awful lot about whiskey over the years and continues to do so, which I'm very, very grateful for. Quite a special job, Stuart. And a lot of people, we were just chatting before, so many people won't really have seen a live cooperage. They won't have been into a cooperage to see what you guys actually do with your hands, you know?
No, I joined the industry in 1979, long before you were born, Darryl. You know, so
it was only 5 years before I was born, Stuart. You know?
Well, I joined in 79, which was probably, it was coming off the peak, I think, of one of the peaks of the Scottish whisky industry. So the cooperages were very buoyant. A lot of distilleries were looking for casks, and that quickly kind of ceased in the early 80s when there was the Whisky Lakes.
Right.
But, cooperages were probably not seen as the luxury part of the side of the business. It was very much the working side of it. Predominantly casks were repaired to go back into the industry. So the general public really wouldn't have access into seeing cooperage, actually seeing a cooperage work. It's...
Had you been in one before you started?
No, well, I ended up, as I say, 1979. I actually had a summer job. I wanted to be a PE teacher. I did a lot of athletics, everything else. I was fortunate enough to get a job during my school holidays in a cooperage. Didn't know, what they did, anything like that. I had a relation who had their own cooperage and then worked for Robertson and Baxter. So, duly, rolling casks about, loading lorries, everything else, and quite fascinated by this craft, which is allegedly the second oldest craft in the world.
I'll take your word for it.
Well, yeah, I wasn't around at that time.
Yeah. Just a bit before you.
Yeah, for anybody kind of listening today's podcast, just for reassurances, the oldest is actually farming and agricultural. Not sure what you would have thought. Yeah. But anyway, and then I went back to do my studies. And then I thought, what a fascinating trade, to see these people actually making casks or repairing casks with their hands, everything else. And, I then inquired about an apprenticeship. And, I think when I look back over these 43 years and that career I've had, did I ever envisage in 1979 having the opportunity to meet, so many people, here in Scotland and internationally as well, who are passionate about whiskies, but then kind of educating them about the whole value and influence that actually wood has in spirit development is another part to it. So it's been a fascinating career.
Yeah, but it's changed a lot. I mean, when you started back in the late 1970s, you were producing casks because you were on the tools. You were a cooper at that point, or an apprenticeship. We need to come on to that. We need to talk a little bit about how long it takes and all that kind of stuff to become a cooper technically on paper. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you were preparing casks for mainly blends, I suspect. Even the casks that went to malt distilleries, that malt whiskey would have been blended into Famous Grouse, whatever it was that you guys were producing back then.
Well, I served my time with Clyde Cooperage, who were part of Robertson and Baxter, and we were a commercial cooperage as such. So yes, you're right. A lot of the casks and the work that we were doing would have been destined for grain spirit, to be honest with you. So, I mean, it's quite interesting now to see that change in the market into the consumers who are very much more, now focusing on single malts. But I think one of the big things as well back then was the amount of coopers who were in the industry, and in the mid-70s there was probably 1,500 coopers,
right,
within Scotland, and then very quickly thereafter in the early 80s, that number then diminished down to probably a couple of hundred and even less, because as that Whisky Lakes were identified, the last thing you need was distilleries producing spirit, and you didn't need coopers repairing casks. So, I was fortunate in the sense that, through all these redundancies, we ended up with, I think, 2 time-served coopers and about 14 apprentices, of which I was one of.
Yeah.
Was fortunate then to get kept on, and I think thereafter the industry started to pick up, and I think probably in the last 15 years it's great to see coopages offering apprenticeships now to young people to learn what is a fascinating craft. It's hard work, but it's very rewarding. But it has changed in the way that we actually, there's a lot more automation coming into it. The whole PBR side has moved. So you used to be paid by results. So the more casks you produced, the more money you earned. But through health and safety and various other kind of legislations, that's kind of moved away from there.
So you won't see that many coopers driving their Panameras out of the cooperage these days, is it?
I don't think so, no.
I'm producing 27 casks a day, bashing them out.
There will be some, and it does take its toll, over the years. But it is a physical job, but it is rewarding. I think when you look back at maybe thinking, well, I've produced casks for these distilleries that have then matured that spirit that consumers are then drinking.
So what's the time served piece? So what the apprenticeship? How long is it to become a cooper? What does that look like, that apprenticeship?
Probably a fortnight now, to be honest.
I think you're doing yourself a disservice there.
It started off as 5 years, but when I joined, it was 4. So basically, you could be assigned to a tradesman who would teach you individually, or some of the companies actually had like schools, apprenticeship schools. So into your 3rd year, so you would learn all about coopering, what you're identifying as bad to replace, cutting in ends, everything else. And then in your 3rd year, you then sat what was called a trade test. So you were assessed by somebody from the National Cooperage Federation and somebody from the union on various aspects of skills that were involved. You then were given a certificate, and that allowed you then to kind of work on your own. And then after your 4th year, you were a time-served cooper. So that was the old kind of tarred and feathered.
Was there a kind of initiation at the end of all of that sort of a graduation ceremony, tarred, feathered, off you go, you've made it, that kind of thing?
Not quite the tarred and feathered, but there was that initiation period. That's right. We won't go into that, but yeah.
I'm sure. Not allowed these days.
It probably still happens, but maybe not to the same extent. And then after that, you have the opportunity to obviously earn your own salary.
And back then, were you paid per piece? Back then, when you were producing a cask, you'd get a certain percentage or whatever it was the agreement was.
Yeah, I mean that for us at Edrington, that was right up until probably 2012. You know,
It
so
was,
it's
yeah,
yeah.
I remember I started in 2012 and you had just changed your job in 2012 as well. And that was probably one of the last things you did, I suppose, moving over into the kind of brand world, I suppose, was it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, you know, through that journey of, you know, an apprenticeship to a time served cooper to becoming a foreman, supervisor, manager, and that was up until about 2012. And then they came along and asked did I want to become the master of wood. I'm sure my colleagues thought it was more of the lump of wood rather than the master of wood. But,
we do call you Woody behind your back. You do know that.
if that's all you call me, then that's fine. You know, that's okay. That's acceptable.
Totally.
But that was a part of still running the cooperages, managing the cooperages that we had in Scotland, and also that brand education piece that you kind of mentioned there. You know, really supporting, you know, Macallan as a brand, about the influences and impacts that wood had on the products that we were producing. And then in 2015, I was asked if I wanted to I set up the audit team. We kind of set up an audit team in Jerez, really to work a lot more closer with our cast suppliers and seasoning bodegas on that kind of the influence and the impact that wood had. So that was interesting. You know, that was a few interesting discussions that we had to have with some suppliers.
Yeah. I remember. I mean, I'd been out with you quite a few times over that period of time. That 2 years, 2014 to 16, something like that, and we went to the cooperages, obviously sawmills, the bodegas themselves, even the forestry spots and things. It was so insightful, and as I'm sure it must have been for you, because having been a cooper for so long, I know you guys. We're going to come on to this in a second. I know you guys had been over to Spain and things like that before for your annual five-a-side football tournaments against the Spanish coopers, which I don't know how they end. What's the score? Did you ever keep tally of how many times we got pumped, or was it?
I think they actually won about 3 games to 1. I think
Scotland winning 3-1, was it? Right.
He'd actually quite a good team in our younger days. There was a number of us maybe played junior football.
A few ringers in, yeah. Never built a cask in their life. Just whipped them over. Fancy a trip to Spain.
I'll tell you, you know, we can speak about that a little bit later. That was more the Spanish tactic, to be quite honest with you. You know,
a few ex-Champions League players just dropping in for a game of fives.
Funny you should say that. There was an occasion where we turned up, and this would have been about the early 90s. 90, I think, was the first trip where we approached the management team that ran the cooperage, and we said, look, it's an opportunity that we could maybe go to Spain as a part of, and we classed it as educational and recreational.
Understood. I
think it was more recreational than educational, to be honest with you. But this would involve a football tournament. So, Julie, the suppliers, all turned up, and it was great. It was a good relationship building between the suppliers. And then one of the suppliers actually came over to Scotland, and we played them. And I think we went back again to Spain, Darryl. And here was this fresh-faced, individual who we'd never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my previous bosses was George Espy, who was very much involved in Spain, and for those who knew George, he was very much a character.
Yeah, kind
of life and soul of the party.
Yeah.
And then through traditional forum, George had said, "Who's this guy?" So oh no, he works in the office. Really? So George, let's see your fingers. Have you got all your fingers? And you're a cooper and everything else. And it transpired that this guy was Piquetti Begueres, who had a cup winners medal with playing for Real Sociedad against Arsenal. Now, that was the time when David Seaman was lobbed from the halfway line.
Yeah.
This guy had about 10 caps for Spain.
Okay, right. So he's not your average five-a-side football player from the Cooperage. No.
But in true Scottish tradition fashion, we kicked him off the park. We saw him as being the kind of link pin between the team. So we duly took him out.
Yeah.
I think he played in another couple of games. I think one occasion he wanted to play for us because we obviously weren't the cleanest
no
players, but you have to take these things into consideration. But they were great relationship building,
Yeah.
And so part of the audits team that we set up was to kind of really kind of grow that relationship for them to understand what we were wanting to achieve. Because latterly it was about it was really understanding about the influences that wood had on both flavour and colour. And just to kind of go back to the point you made, for me it was extremely fascinating because from learning a craft where it was making casks that you just wanted to get them out the door to then earn money, to latterly then understand about this 360 degrees impact and influence and how important a cooper was in the whole cask production process.
Yeah, it's massive, and it's also huge as well, this link with Spain. It's quite an unlikely partner in some ways when you think of where we are in the world and you think about the way that people live down in Jerez and the sort of surrounding towns that make up the Sherry Triangle. I mean, you've spent a lot of time out there. I mean, you basically kind of co-lived there for a good few years. And you talk about guys like George as well, who I guess established a lot of these relationships back in the late 70s and early 80s and spent a huge amount of time out there. It's a fascinating combination of cultures as well as technical expertise and stuff, which benefits the ultimate flavour of whiskey. But that must have been a really, really cool time in your career as well, having spent so much time on the tools and actually getting out there towards the end of your career and forging and developing those relationships.
Definitely. I mean that would have all stemmed, from hundreds of years ago, when there was obviously sherry as a fortified wine was very much a favourable drink. And I think, we can maybe touch about that, but I think, we don't give sherry wines the recognition that they deserve. And I think we've had this discussion many times. But I think historically, when you look at sherry casks, that whole influence that sherry had in, globally really, or certainly within Europe and the UK, that when these casks then arrived from Spain with sherry in them, there was nowhere for these casks to go. And the Scots, being extremely frugal, thought, here's a great bargain, realised that they did have an impact and an influence in spirit maturation. And that kind of set the ball rolling from having casks available to then the Consejo Regulador changing the regulations about transporting sherry wine in bulk and having a bottle. So then looking at casks being made to your own specification.
Because that was in the 80s as well, wasn't it? That was 84 or 85 or something.
Yeah, that was
there's a lot.
Yeah,
so you've got the Whiskey Lakes, and then you've got this change in legislation, which means that casks are no longer coming over in the same way they were. So a lot of change in the 80s, and you kind of worked through that, which is quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think it's been great because obviously, as the sales of sherry have declined, the spirits industry, I think very much led by the Scotch whisky industry, came in. It began to support bodegas by building new casks with seasoning wine. And I think that sometimes it's a separate discussion about sherry casks against sherry seasoned, and there's reasons why sherry seasoned casks are much more beneficial for the spirits industry. But I think they obviously brought security to the cooperages within the regions, and they brought, added security to the bodegas as well, to be honest.
No, you can see that. I mean, when it's fascinating. You spent a lot of time over at Edrington. I was at Edrington and then went to White Mackay, who are owned by Fundador bodegas, and we were getting a lot of casks from Spain, but they were sherry bodega casks, not sherry seasoned casks, and it was quite interesting just seeing the differences that you do get, and how you can optimize the output of the cask in different ways, where you want an influence from wine that was in that cask before. Or at Edrington, what the philosophy is about the wood, the quality of the oak, influencing the whiskey over a full maturation rather than a 2-year finishing period or something like that.
Yeah, and I for me, personally, I think that's where maybe some of these sherry casks, the traditional sherry casks, would be able to offer, a support to a finished product. If you were looking at potentially long-term maturation in a sherry cask, a traditional sherry cask, then I would question it, because you're looking at casks that are 40 years plus. They're inert vessels. I mean, basically.
The wood's not going to give you a huge amount, is it? And that might be okay for like a long maturation if you're not looking for a huge amount of oak influence. But again, you don't know until you fill the thing, right? That's the problem.
That's right. So a lot of that. So latterly, then I was involved in a lot of kind of research, working with the scientists basically in the labs teams on projects very much about spirit maturation and the influences and impacts that wood would have, because for us, all of our products were naturally coloured, so that there was very much an emphasis on wood and the quality of wood and toasting temperatures.
So you as a cooper who's gone through that whole change, and you've ended up working on more the output of the casks, so quality in essence of whiskey. What would I've got a couple of questions for you. Favorite sherry? What sherry would you go for then? And what have you got in the fridge that you reach for regular? Are you allowed to say that? Are you going to upset a few guys in Spain?
No, probably not. I think in the 2 or 3 days that we actually get as a summer in Scotland, then it would be a Fino or a Manzanilla. But it would be in the fridge. It wouldn't be sitting like your nice display at the back of us here on a back shelf. It would be cold, served chilled, just like a wine. But I also like Paulo Cortados. I'm not a great favourite of PX.
I'm not actually as well.
For me, it's too rich. It's too sweet for me, to be honest with you. But I suppose, like whiskies, you've got, you can either have spirit that's influenced by American oak, which is more lighter, sweeter, more vanilla, as opposed to something that's kind of European oak that's more kind of spicy and rich in dried fruits and dried spices and everything else. So I think the wines give you that opportunity as well. I mean, I love a Oloroso as well. To be honest. So.
Oloroso is very good. What about whiskey then? So you've made a lot of casks, looked after all the wood for Macallan, but also Highland Park and also Glenrothes as well. Glenturret for a period of time too. So what would if you were only allowed one bottle from the whiskies you've worked on over the years, which one would you reach for?
Oh, come on, Darrow. It's probably Highland Park 25.
Right.
As a Macallan master of wood, I hope this hasn't been broadcasted too far afield.
Everyone that works for Macallan always says Highland Park's their favourite. Anyway, don't worry. Don't worry. That's funny.
I think there's so many great whiskies out there, and I think they all lend themselves for great discussions about what people like, what they dislike. I'm not a favourite of peated whiskies, but then again, that's just my palate. With anything else, but it's I think that it's a great conversation builder, to be honest with. I think, like you being involved in the industry, we've been very, very fortunate to sample some fantastic products. And I think that's the difficult part, to actually pin it on one specific bottle, to be honest.
And I think there's an emotional thing here as well. I'm drinking double cask 12-year-old, which we worked on together, the whole launch of it, I remember. And we were traveling around the world sharing this story, and you would deliver the story of the wood, and I would just, chuck a few tasting notes about and make it look like I knew what I was talking about. And actually, I remember it like it was yesterday, because it was a big deal at the time. And actually it was, in the core range, really bringing that whole story to life, because it wasn't just about European oak. And I think that was a story maybe that people had wanted to hear most of the time. But actually, American oak sherry casks are fabulous. They're my favorite cask type. You talk about Highland Parks. My favorite Highland Parks are often matured in these beautiful American oak sherry casks. And you go to any bodega, 99% of the casks in that bodega are American oak. Very few will be European oak, right?
Exactly, and I think that's that misperception that people have, that okay, it's well, obviously Spain's in Europe, they're using casks, must be European oak, but you're spot on. The vast majority of these casks are ex-American, because they don't want these tannins, leaching into their new wines. So they want something that's going to be less reactive, and that's why then they want inert vessels as well.
Yeah.
So they don't want their new wines put into new casks, basically. Yeah. So that but the part of it is, for us in sherry seasoning, is that against bourbon, is that if so you've got American oak that's ex-bourbon, and you've got American oak that's ex-sherry. Now, if you were looking at probably spirit development, you would be favouring sherry seasoned American oak, because you're using a lower ABV wine. Now, normally it is Olorosos that's around about 18% ABV. So the larger vessels with a lower ABV wine is then going to, although it will take some extractives out of the wood, it'll probably remove maybe some of that astringency and bitterness that you would associate, but it then allows that new mate spirit to interact more with the elements of the wood. Whereas bourbon, for example, is smaller casks, higher ABV. You've then got the casks charred as opposed to toasted, and that has an influence in itself, because obviously the char is acting as a carbon filter. Now, with bourbon using at least 51% maize, it's quite sulfury maize as a cereal. So that char acts as a carbon filter. So, these are one of the reasons why the Americans are producing and manufacturing casks for what they require. Yeah. And then we're doing the same really in the same aspect with sherry.
Yeah. Because it does. I mean, that's the thing. When you started off, you're on the tools, you're building it, and it's technical in a different way. It's a trade. You're actually dealing with the nature of the wood and what you need to do with it, either to repair it or to construct a cask. I guess where you've ended up is much more on that like technical side, is the difference between a toast and a char, the difference between a species of American oak versus European oak. Well, what's a European oak? It's Quercus robur, is it Cecile, Pedunculata? You're going into big rabbit holes with each of those topics, and actually a lot of this is quite new. I think people had a feel for it, but it was never documented probably in the way that you guys have done in the last 10 years. I mean, ultimately your role as a master of wood was to go and investigate all that stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean you're right. I mean, when people talk about French oak and they talk about Spanish oak, I do kind of have a slight kind of laugh, because yes, these trees are in Spain and in France, but they're, as you say, the three main dominant species are Quercus alba, which is American white oak, or you've got its European relations, which are robur or Petrea. But geographically, you'll have pockets where you'll have more of a continuity of maybe Petrea. So when people talk about French oak, if you probably look to southwest France, down around about the Limousin region, where it's very, very much kind of cognacs, that is very much Quercus roba. But if you then go to, say, central France and northern France, that becomes then Petrea.
Yeah.
But and then similarly, along northern Spain, this and towards kind of Galicia, it's more European. It's roba.
Yeah.
But you then look at Hungary, Ukraine, Romania. These are more kind of European Quercus roba driven, and so then you look at kind of the whole the tannin of these particular species of timber that then will have an impact and an influence on what you're looking for. So this is where it is very much about the quality of the wood, the species of the wood, but also then the toasting temperatures. Because if you don't have enough heat into that particular wood, then you're not starting to break down some of the chemical compounds that'll add some of these, flavour characteristics and colour. I mean, we can alter flavour, and we can also alter colour by changing temperatures, toasting temperatures.
Brilliant. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, that's there's a lot there. I mean, how do you, now that you've hung your boots up, what are you going to do with your time now that you're not going to train brand ambassadors and sales guys and internal people, all these businesses about oak? What's happening next?
Do you know? Do you ever kind of walk away from the industry? Probably not. I've had obviously a few inquiries about what am I going to do, and I think I will do a bit of consultancy, because I do think that there is a value in the whole education piece about the influence. I mean, people, new distilleries are being built on a regular basis, and obviously you need casks to fill. But I think it's trying to understand what that distiller, what type of spirit that distiller's trying to achieve. What's coming off the stills, what kind of wood species would be best suited for maybe what that brand's trying to kind of manufacture. And so kind of, I suppose, supporting people along that way about how you can help them and point them in the right direction. And I think about a bit of R&R, kind of hack my way around the golf courses, and
you need to get back to in Jerez, get back to Il Pirati and practice some of that karaoke as well.
No, singing's not one of my fortes.
I know.
That we were never a duet. That was for sure.
No, different. I think we're too similar, too noisy.
Yeah, kind of maybe more that rock kind of music that we have to try. Just sing any kind of words, to be honest with you.
That's true.
But I will still go back to Jerez, on a regular basis. I think, I made a lot of friends in Jerez, built up a lot of relationships from the business side of it, and I still think there was part of that about educating the Spaniards about what people are what they would like out of a cask rather than people perceiving. So I think it's building these relationships between distillers companies and cask manufacturers and seasoning. But it is becoming difficult. It's wood prices are increasing significantly. We've got the challenges of wines, having the volume of wines available as well. So, interesting times.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's brilliant to get an insight into it as well from yourself. Obviously, so much experience and knowledge, and tons of it to share. And you always make it sound so much more interesting as well. And I know it's interesting anyway. Obviously, the connection with Scotland and Spain. But hearing you always pick up a couple of more things from you. When you get going. So thanks so much for joining us, mate. Much appreciated. And I guess if anyone's listening that hasn't been over to Jerez to see some of the bodegas or even the cooperages and things, I still think it's probably the best drinks trip that you can do. You know, it's a special place. It's obviously, it means a lot to you, and I've been really lucky as well. I've been over a lot, and I still go over my own time. I went on a golf trip, and as you know, I don't play golf.
No, that's true. You don't play golf.
And I went to Malaga, and rather than playing golf, I just drove to Jerez. And I caught up with Manolo and Kenny and stuff like that, and they took us around the bodegas, cooperages and stuff. And it's a pleasure every single time, and it's always good to see you, mate.
Yeah, well, there's a business opportunity. Maybe we should start, Daz and Stu kind of Jerez tours or something like that.
That's it. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah.
Do you know? I think you're right, because people, they have this perception that sherry is obviously kind of an older generation drink, but I think it's much of that education for people to enjoy it, and what's the right way, when's the right occasions, but certainly a place. It's a fantastic part of the country.
Definitely.
Fantastic food, wines, and just a culture, a lot of history.
Oh, definitely. Look, we'll get back out there soon for a sherry. I look forward to it, mate. Thanks so much.
I'll hold you to that then, Darryl.
Legend. Superb. Cheers.
Okay.